I'm going to forewarn you, as we did the previous panel. Once you've testified, we keep the record open for at least a year. Don't be surprised to hear from us. And I'm going to encourage you folks, we're running a little bit late, but the individual we asked to speak next is worthy of another 15 or 20 minutes of your time. And once the panel leaves us, we're going to have Max Brooks share some thoughts with you. Many may be familiar with his critically acclaimed novel, World War Z, which is a fascinating look into our world. But more importantly, is a non-resident fellow of the Modern War Institute at West Point. Senior resident fellow, Art of Future Warfare Project at the Brent Scowcroft Center on International Security at the Atlantic Council. So I'm going to ask this author and scholar, Max Brooks, please join us.
Thank you. I will be brief. I have sat there for a good 12 to 13 hours, and I've listened to a lot of experts, and all of them geniuses. What I haven't heard is a way to communicate and engage the public. And I think that this would be wonderful in isolation if we lived in a country with a permanent ruling class that could take care of the big issues and let the rest of us peasants go on and live our lives. But we don't. We live in a republic. We live in a democratic society where public engagement, public support, public cooperation is paramount. And I haven't heard anything about that. Is how do you deal with the mass psychology of boomeranging between denial and panic? Because that's how society works. You're either in complete denial, where you think, well, this doesn't affect me, or you're in complete panic, where you think, oh my God, I need to put a bucket on my head and shoot at anybody who comes near my door. And I've lived through all of that. And I can tell you that we are now in full denial mode. And we are in full denial mode for many reasons. Some of it are short-term, some of them are long-term. Part of it is long-term because, let's be honest, we've made a conscious effort in this country since the 1960s to avoid hyperactivity on the part of the citizenry. We don't want this country tearing itself apart like we did in the 60s. So we've had this sort of divorce of overactivism. Part of it was the end of the Cold War, where we literally thought, well, I think there was some moron who called it the end of history. And whoever that person was, find who they are and punch them in the face. Because it was not the end of history. Things were going to still happen to us. But there was this attitude in the country that the Cold War is over, we can all go home, happy days are here again. Part of it was, let's be honest, Iraq, where right after 9/11, we were involved. The American public jumped right back into the fray and were told, and this is direct quote, to pray, hug our kids, and participate in the economy. And that's it. That was all we were asked of. But we gave the government our full support because we were told that there was a country that had weapons of mass destruction that was coming here. And they didn't. And we cried wolf. And the public took it as such, that if Saddam Hussein doesn't have weapons of mass destruction, therefore nobody does. And so we've gone from the hyper-panic of 9/11 to complete denial, where people don't want to be engaged at all. We have also successfully, in my lifetime, gone to war against science, gone to war against the news, gone to war against truth, to the point now that people are all living in their own bubbles and believing what they want to believe. And we are now reaping that whirlwind. And if we are going to protect ourselves, we need to get back to that. We need to get back to realizing that we all live in one country and that we are the people. We are the government. The American people. We govern ourselves. And so while we talk about logistics, we talk about science, we talk about the law, we talk about involvement in various government agencies, we also need to talk about how are we going to communicate these ideas to the American people. When I was a kid growing up in the firestorm of AIDS, what saved us was a guy dressed like him, a guy who looked like an Amish admiral. And he had a calm demeanor and a funny beard, and he went on TV constantly, and he woke us up and calmed us down. And make no mistake, that's how we beat AIDS in this country, with education. Still don't have a cure. But public education, engaging the American people, explaining AIDS is deadly serious, but it's preventable, and here's how. And that's how we did it. And so when there is another outbreak, and as we all know, it will happen, public education, public involvement is going to be as vital as any of the physical assets that we have at our command. So how are we going to do that? How are we going to get in the middle road between complete denial and outright panic? How are we going to bridge this partisan gap? Because let's be honest, this government of the people, are acting like divorced parents, dividing up issues like they're furniture. You get that issue, I'll get that issue. But no, as we've said, germs affect all of us. Germs don't have voting records and party lines. So how is everybody going to come back? How are we going to confront the partisans on both sides of the aisle that are trying to tear us apart? And that is on both sides. Conservatives, when I hear this, I hear the conservative rhetoric of, well, this is big government bureaucracy, I don't want to have to pay for this. I also hear the liberal rhetoric of, well, I read on the internet somewhere that vaccinating my kids will give them 3 heads, and so therefore I'm not going to do it. In my hometown of Santa Monica, California, was ground zero of the measles outbreak. These are educated people. These are people who thought they were so elite, and yet they weren't vaccinating their children. Well, where was the guy dressed like him to tell us, no, you need to do this? You know who did it? Jimmy Kimmel, a talk show host, actually had doctors on his show who, pardon my language, literally direct quote came on and said, vaccinate your goddamn kid. And that woke people up. Because that has to happen. Because in a way, we're also victims of our own success. None of us now have to worry that if our child has a headache or a fever tonight, that they're going to wake up with polio. We can all sit down and have salad, raw vegetables from a restaurant, knowing that it's not going to kill us. 100 years ago, we fought tooth and nail to combat the viruses that used to murder and maim millions of Americans. And we've done it so well, we're 3 generations out, that things like the word polio is something that your grandparents talk about. So how do we remind them? How do we remind the American people, no, these viruses aren't extinct. They're not dinosaurs. They can come back. And they can affect us all. And all of us need to respond. That's all I'm going to say.
Does anyone dare seek to offer a question?
Chairman, I would like to follow up on one thing that Max
Go at
said.
your own peril. Go ahead, Senator.
Then again, first of all, let me just
subject that was-
compliment you on an eloquent and passionate statement, and you can see from the reaction how much in agreement we are. But I think the big challenge we face in this era of fake news and allegations of fake news is discerning fact from fiction. And whether it's measles and vaccinations or climate change or any one of an array of things, our people, the people of this country and the world today, are faced with an enormous challenge of discerning truth from fiction and fact from the unrealities of rhetoric. You obviously have thought about this a great deal. How are we going to get out of this mess, this dilemma that we're facing today as we have a president of the United States, in some cases, who makes assertions that I would challenge? I think most people do. So how do we deal with that?
I think, honestly, I think that elected officials need to have the courage to confront partisans that might have been useful to their political careers at some point. There does have to be what I call the John McCain moment. When Senator McCain was running for president and that woman talked about Senator Obama and said he's an Arab. And you could see where McCain's soul came forward and said, no, he's not. And that courage was matched by General Powell, who then went public and said, what if he was? So what? Is there something wrong with a Muslim kid in this country thinking one day I can be president? Now, these are Republicans taking on elements of the Republican base who might have been very helpful to them at the risk of their own reputations and their own careers. And that kind of courage as Americans is what we need. That's what we all need. I would say this happened in, I believe it was the 1960s when the Republican Party took on the John Birch Society and said, no, we're not part of you. We're here for all Americans, and we need to do that. When Jenny McCarthy talks about not vaccinating your kids, it is the role of liberals and Democrats to confront her and say, no. You are not a scientist. You take your clothes off for a living. Good for you. But that does not qualify you to tell me not to give my child a vaccination.
Thank you, Max.
Well, I think that we should buy you a uniform. Ask you to grow a beard. And there's an important role for you in America's future.
Thank you.
Surgeon General Brooks. Oh, we'll waive that. You've been great. You're really, the Paul Revere metaphor is overdone, but you've played that role today. And
I can't think of a more fitting and appropriate conclusion to this first of several meetings we're going to have this year. We all in this panel, the ex officio members, we've had a pretty regular attendance and sustained commitment from a lot of people in this theater today. To your point, as we discussed with you and others, how we elevate the notion this is a real threat, it is a real risk. Let's not ignore that reality. Let's also not ignore the reality. With the right approach, with the right public policy, we can manage it just like we manage everything else. So let's accept that reality. And I also remind you, there was a great lesson last 2 years ago, the Allegheny College in my old congressional district, they give a civility award every year. 2 years ago, they gave it to John McCain for that moment. You know who his counterpart was on the other side? Vice President Joe Biden. When a nominee for president said the Republicans are our enemies, he said, no, they're not your enemies. They're your opponents. So we got a lot of work to do, elevate it, and wish we could elevate it to the tone and the focus that you just did for all of us. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.